This is a video with some tips for issues that may arise when grooming hairs in ZBrush. When grooming fibers in ZBrush, it may be to your advantage to turn on transparency. So activate edit opacity. With or without ghosting, that doesn't matter much. That's to your discretion. And why? Well, first let me turn off transparency, and I have the groom hair long brush selected. So when you hover with your cursor over the hairs, you should see a little red dot that jumps to other hairs or fibers. And if it's visible in the video, then you can see that right now the red dot is absolutely not at the center of my brush. Sometimes it is, but then it jumps back to right now the root. When you turn on transparency, then you don't have that problem anymore. So now the red dot is really close to where my cursor is. So that is something that has been bugging me for a long time. And now finally I found the answer. So turn on transparency. If I turn it off, then right now my cursor is at the tip, but the red dot, so that what is being selected by the brush, is actually at the root. And you see, I can't move. I'm clicking and dragging, and the hairs don't move because the red dot is at the root. So turn on transparency, and now you don't have a problem. Another tip about splitting fibers into a separate subtool. In a previous video I explained that when you create a fiber mesh, that this is not regular Polymesh 3D, meaning that even I have turned the fibers into a separate subtool, when I go to my fiber mesh palette, I still can turn fast preview on and off. Now, what I want to show you now is sometimes it may be to your advantage to separate a certain part into a separate subtool. So if I, for instance, select this one and split that into a separate subtool, so split hidden, now I have a separate subtool of that polygroup of those fibers, and as you can see, you can still turn on fast preview and turn it off again. So this is still regular fiber mesh. So let me do that again with another polygroup. So I'm going to split hidden that one. So now I have that polygroup as a separate subtool and that polygroup as a separate subtool. And for both, I can turn on fast preview. So still fiber mesh. But when you merge down, so I'm going to select that one and do a merge down. Now you see in your preview settings, fast preview is grayed out. So now this has been turned into a regular Polymesh 3D, and you will not be able to fast preview or to higher your previous level or lower your previous level. So you can split fibers and they still are fiber mesh, but once you merge down, then you no longer have a fiber mesh but regular Polymesh 3D. So that is something to be aware of. In the previous video I have shown you that when you apply gravity to fiber mesh and when you update that setting, that the gravity direction also changes. So before you apply gravity, and for instance if I want this to be my position of geometry when I apply gravity, then I might store this view, and you can easily do that by going to movie and then show a timeline and then press over here so you have a keyframe. Now when I rotate my model around and I want the exact same position, then all I have to do is tap the left or right arrow keys. So as you have seen, I've gone back to that key, so you can store different keys. So if I want this to be my front view, I click again to have another key in my timeline. And now when I press the left arrow key, you see I jump back to that position. So I can turn movie show off now. If I press to the left, I go to the front view. If I press the left arrow, the right to the front view and press the left arrow key, I jump back to that position that I created. So now when I do preview, the hairs go over there. Now when I press the right arrow key, I go to my front view. Like that, I can edit. If I want to change the gravity, and I'll say okay, minus 0.5, and I realize, oh yeah, that's not the position I wanted it in. So I press my left arrow key, go back to that position, turn off preview and turn it on again. And now the hairs are according to that view. So if you have a particular view that is really difficult to go back to, because when you simply press the shift key, that's not a big deal. So now it is with the shift key, but I had rotated it. So you see, this is with shift key, and this is with pressing. Sometimes you have to press the right arrow key before it actually jumps back to the first key. So right arrow key and then left arrow key, and then it jumps back to that position where you wanted the gravity to work from. So I hope this was clear. In a previous video, I have shown you that you can single out individual hairs by masking. So what I've shown you is I masked the tip, for instance, do an inverse on the mask, and then shrink it down and sharpen it a couple of times until the whole fiber is unmasked. Now there is a much better and faster way with the transpose line. So I'm going to control click and drag to clear my mask, and I'm going to press the W key for my move tool. I'm going to try and get it out of the way like that. Now with the transpose tool active, I can go to the fiber that I want to single out, and you see a red dot, or you should see a red dot, maybe not visible on the video, but anyway it's there at the root. Now when I hold down Control, the red dot becomes yellow. I click and drag just a little bit to mask out the root, and you see everything else is now masked except for that fiber. If I want to add to that selection, so for instance, and I'm going to try to get it out of the way, go to another fiber, press Ctrl and then Shift, and click and drag, and continue to unmask the ones I want. So for instance, that one, Ctrl Shift, now the dot is white, and drag out. Press the Q key to go to draw mode. So now I can sculpt only on the unmasked. I'm going to clear the mask. I can also individually mask out one fiber by immediately pressing Ctrl Shift. So when I press Ctrl Shift, and I should activate the transpose tool first, so W for transpose, then Ctrl Shift, now click and drag, and you see that fiber is being masked. And I'm going to clear the mask and Ctrl Shift click again. It takes some practicing, so I'm dragging it out not too far. Ctrl Shift for the other one over there, Ctrl Shifts. So Q. So if I go back to draw mode, you see that those three that I masked out individually do not move. So either you start out directly with Ctrl Shift, so W for the transpose line, Ctrl Shift, and then you mask out an individual one. So you see that one doesn't move. Ctrl Z to undo. Or you drag out the transpose line starting with the Control key, then that one stays unmasked, the rest is masked, and now when I press Ctrl Shift, I will unmask instead of mask. Just like that. So a much faster way than selecting or masking the tip, inverting the mask, shrinking it, sharpening it, shrinking it, until you have what it takes to manipulate it. Just use the transpose line. Imagine you get to a point where you've groomed the hairs into a right mess and you don't know how to recuperate from that. You can try several groom brushes in order to move everything again back into place, and you can try smoothing it out. So I'm smoothing right now. That doesn't help. Well, in the FiberMesh palette, in the brush palette, you have something like stiffness, and if that is not 0, springiness. And I'm going to press Shift, so I'm dealing with my settings for the Shift for the smooth brush. So when I set stiffness to 100 and springiness to 100, and now smoothed out, now you see, and I'm going to move also a bit, press the Shift key again with stiffness 100 and springiness 100. And what does springiness do? So springiness says it subtly tries to bring the fiber back to its original position while maintaining stiffness. Only active when stiffness is turned on. So when you put that all the way to 100 for the smooth brush, then you see I can put all my fibers back into an easy sculptable position. And I have also my mask by polygroups on, so if I'm working on one polygroup, the other one isn't affected. So these hairs were created with gravity, and the smooth brush is kind of acting without it. So it's going against the gravity, it's just putting or trying to put those fibers back in their original position, and that is probably before gravity was applied. So when I let go of Shift, I'm working with the move brush. I can also turn on stiffness and the springiness to 100. So it's when working with FiberMesh, it is really important to check out your brush settings, because they make a massive difference on how you can control the placement of the fibers. Very useful, and without the springiness, without stiffness, it may not be immediately clear on the video what they exactly do, so it's something you will have to check out for yourself, experiment with stiffness and springiness. And with front collision tolerance, I usually turn it on. So front collision tolerance, if you have geometry in the background, then with front collision tolerance, detection tolerance, the geometry in the background is being evaluated, and I prefer to turn it off unless it is really necessary. And in one of my previous videos, I demonstrate the front collision detection tolerance, so I suggest to check it out. Anyway, with your brush settings FiberMesh, these settings are very important, and also when you are using groom brushes, you can change the behavior of those groom brushes by adjusting these settings. So this is a very important palette. This should be open when you are working or grooming fibers. So again, shift stiffness 100 and springiness 100. You see that the fibers try to go back in their original position. And of course, I'm doing this with a lot of the intensity. You could do that with different intensities. So if I move that and for the shift brush lower my intensity, then it even more, so only 1, and gently tap, then you can control everything better, of course. So stiffness and springiness, very important setting, and used with a smooth brush you can clear up the mess that you've created if the need arises. Just a bit more of an example with the stiffness and springiness of FiberMesh. So just to demonstrate, if I pull the hairs and then shift with stiffness 100 and springiness 100, sometimes they jump back just straight up, but that's not always the case. And by the way, I've turned off mask by polygroups at the moment, so again shift, so it does kind of straighten out, but it's not a magical touch for straightening out your mess. Anyway, if I move my hairs back upright a bit, the stiffness 100 and springiness 100 is going to try and move and straighten out your fibers. So it is a way to untangle, and maybe I can turn off polyframe for a moment, to untangle what you have created. So you might need to move or groom with the groom brushes your fibers again, and then with shift stiffness 100 and springiness 100 smooth out so that they become straighter again. So that you don't have to go and manipulate individual fibers. Like that. And of course, with the shift key pressed for the move brush, I can turn it off and turn stiffness off, and then I'm smoothing in a regular fashion, which has a lot less effect when they are straight. So now when my fibers are curved, the smoothing is going to gently smooth them out, and then I can put stiffness back on, maybe springiness to 30, and maybe stiffness also not so high, so you can play with these settings that it is stronger or less strong. So important settings to help you groom your fibers. A quick and easy way to create polygroups is by painting a mask and then press Ctrl W to make the mask into a polygroup. So when you turn on mask by polygroups to 100, then when I press the Ctrl key and start painting a mask, then the other polygroups will not be affected. So you can go over them, and you see that's something also that gets masked out. So I forgot to go over the other polygroups when I painted over there. So when I paint now, Ctrl W, now height, you see those were left over in a previous painting operation. So it's important that when you press Ctrl and start painting that you go over the other polygroups in order to make sure that the border also is being masked. Control W. So go over the other polygroups. Control W. And this is an easy way to quickly create your polygroups. In other videos, I often see people making selections and then press Control W. That is something that you can do, of course. But you can also simply easily paint your mask, and with mask polygroups set to 100, you won't affect the other polygroups, but you can go over them to make sure the borders are masked. Control W, Control W, and so on. So now when I do a preview, and of course I'm going to turn off the preview, I should mask those polygroups. So I'm going to hide the others, and then I'm going to grow this selection a bit. So Control Shift X to grow my selection once, and then I can press Control and click to mask, Control Shift click to unhide, and Control click to invert the mask. Now press preview, turn off transparency, polygroup, and accept. I'm going to say no. So now if I turn on polyframe again, you see that I have my polygroups in the fibers, and when I turn on fast preview, then the rendering is somewhat better, just like that. So easy way to create your polygroups is just by painting them with mask by polygroups set to 100 to rapidly create your polygroups. And you can create them in any form that you like, of course. So I could create strips, Control W, Control W, and so on. And you see I forgot some over there, so Control Z to undo, and again go over the other polygroup so that the border is masked. Control W, and then again Control Shift X to grow, invert my selection, mask it, unhide, preview, and accept. No. And I have my polygroups. So I should have said yes, because sometimes with a lot of fibers, the fast preview is better. So easy way to create your polygroups. And don't forget about front collision detection tolerance for your brushes. You can set them individually for each brush. So if I were, for instance, to move this polygroup closer to the underlying geometry, now from this view, that is no problem whatsoever. But now if I look up to it perpendicularly, if you will, and click on that polygroup and now go back, you see that the hairs have jumped away from the surface, and that is because of the front collision detection. So let me undo to see you the difference. So if I turn my front collision detection off right now for the move brush and go back to that perpendicular view, so the perpendicular view towards your background mesh, and click again, now it did not jump away from the underlying geometry. So again, if I turn it up, and I'm going to give it a high setting, and it's pixel dependent, so it depends how far you are zoomed in or out. So again, move that polygroup a bit, and you see it has jumped. So when I were to draw this, so you see a difference from here to there with your front collision detection tolerance setting. So when grooming fibers, you regularly have to check your settings, preserve length, is to 100. When I set it to 0, I can make him longer. And if I'm in another view, even with front collision, or with preserved length 0, you don't have front collision detection available. So if I turn it, for instance, to 1, now I can lengthen the fibers, and I also can move them closer to the geometry. But as soon as I rotate my view, with front collision detection tolerance set to a higher setting, now when I look to it perpendicularly, when I move the hairs right now, then again you see that they have jumped from your geometry. And then smooth out, stiffness, for instance 25 stiffness. And again, for the smooth brush you also have front collision detection, so I'm going to Ctrl Z, and you might want to turn that off if you not want you see now with the smoothing the gap has gone bigger, so I'm going to Ctrl Z to undo, or Ctrl Z, but that was where I was with my move brush. So Shift set for the smooth brush front collision detection to 0, the stiffness to something that you want, and then smooth out, and you are straightening your fibers. And with stiffness off, I'm really smoothing them out. And then of course I will have to, and now for my move brush my collision detection is 0. So that is setting the front collision detection tolerance that you should apply when you need it, and then when you don't need it anymore, you should turn it off, because otherwise unexpected jumping may occur. And the same goes for your groom brushes. So if you take your groom hair long, then you see front collision detection tolerance has been set to 0 for that brush. So right now, if I look at it perpendicularly, then my hairs are okay. So I'm going to move them a bit closer to the geometry to make the difference visible. So now I can move them with a perpendicular view, and they stay relative as close to the surface as before. But when I turn this up with my front collision detections, you see the behavior is totally different. Now I have that. So this is a setting that is very important, and you should be aware of that when using your brushes.